is MM2H? What is the Malaysia My Second Home program?
So with that kind of confusion comes fraud.
It sounds like a completely different world to what we now know.
In the real world, fraud still finds its way. Foreigners tried to game the system.
What exactly were the requirements for MM2H?
And just like that, MM2H comes to a complete stop.
In your opinion, it never really was given a chance.
I don't think the chance should be given.
TG, welcome to the studio. It's
Hi,
an
Keith.
absolute pleasure to have you here.
Same here.
Please have a seat.
Thank you. It's going to be interesting.
TG, welcome to part one of this amazing series on MM2H. It's an absolute pleasure to be sitting here with you.
I look forward to that interview thing.
Can you just break it down for us? What actually is MM2H? What is the Malaysia My Second Home program?
MM2H, or Malaysia My Second Home, is basically Malaysia's golden ticket for long-term living. It's a special visa program that lets foreigners stay in the country for years, and in fact, potentially indefinitely. You can come and go, leave this country, come in as many times as you wish. There's no need to worry about any tourist visa limits or whatnot. The program officially kicked off in 2002, Keith, and it has evolved a few times. The first one in 2006, then 2021, and the most recently 2 years ago, 2023. But here's what gets very interesting. Malaysia just doesn't have one version. It actually has three versions, Keith. First, there is the SMM2H, created by the Sarawak state government, a separate version for Sabah, and then the Peninsular Malaysian version, which we will focus on today. So, why there are three, you may ask? Well, it goes back to 1963 when Sabah and Sarawak joined Malaya to form Malaysia. As part of the deal, they kept control over certain things, and that includes immigration. So yes, even though Malaysia is one country, each region, especially on the island of Borneo, have its own version of this program. Now, before MM2H, foreigners tried to game the system with what they call a visa run. Basically, coming and going, leaving and re-entering the country every few months on a tourist visa to stay longer. Well, you may think it is clever, right? Well, it is risky, expensive, and frankly illegal. Plenty of people were caught and blacklisted. Some were barred from re-entering for years. MM2H was created as a proper legal alternative to all this illegal hassle.
Interesting. So TG, let's just rewind a little bit if we can. MM2H, I know, has been around for a while now. You just mentioned it's been here since about 2004 or 2006. 2004?
Yeah, but it's actually 2002 probably. Makes no difference. That time there's no internet anyway.
Yeah.
People will just forget.
But it didn't just pop out of anywhere, did it? It didn't pop out of nowhere. So can you take us back to where it all began and tell us maybe an interesting story from when it first started?
Yes, sure. The roots of MM2H actually stretch much further than 2002 to 1990s with something called the Silver Hair Program. It was Malaysia's first experiment in inviting foreigners to retire here long term. But back then, promotion was tough. There was no internet, and with that, no social media. Advertising is very expensive, no flashy websites. You only have brochures and word of mouth, and probably occasional newspaper advertisements. That's all. Basically, Keith, the Silver Hair Program was aimed squarely at wealthy retirees, mostly older Europeans who have lived and worked in Malaysia for decades, since 1970s, 80s, and 90s. And they just couldn't bring themselves to leave this country. And the name says it all, silver hair. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't difficult, it wasn't politically correct. The idea was that after spending their careers here, they settle into retirement and eventually get permanent residency. Then in 2002, something changed, or you will even say everything changed. The Silver Hair program was rebranded and revamped into what we know today as the Malaysia My Second Home, or MM2H. But remember, Keith, I think you can remember, 2002 was still pretty early in the digital age.
Mm-hmm.
Internet was clunky, dial-up tones, remember,
Yep.
still ringing in people's ears. And the phones, of course, we are talking about the Nokia and Motorola flip phones. That was the year 2002 when Nokia released its first camera phone, the legendary Nokia 7650, boasting a very great 0.3 megapixel camera. Well, that's kind of primitive today. It was revolutionary at the time. So yes, MM2H was born in that era. A world of grainy photos, SMS-only texting, clamshell phones. Well, it does feel like a lifetime away.
I'm still trying to get around that you knew what the legendary Nokia 7650 was. We'll go back to that later. But TG, great story. But now, if we can you take us back to the early days of your company, to Alter Domus? It started in 2004, didn't it? But can you tell me why you started it?
Well, Keith, that's right. 2004, we were doing it unofficially. The company formed in 2006 because of the licensing requirement. Okay. So let me tell you, those early years that when the MM2H started, it was the wild, wild west of MM2H. From 2004 to 2006, before the program was properly formalized, everything was handled at the state level. You could apply through the state immigration department, and let us just say it, it's a bit of a circus because every state has its own ideas. There were no central authority overseeing this program. So every immigration office has its own idea of MM2H. I'm not joking when I say this. The morning version of the MM2H might not be the same as the afternoon version, and depending on which officer was on duty. And Penang's requirement may be different from KL. It was chaotic, and to be very honest, a complete mess. So with that kind of confusion comes fraud and abuse
God,
in epic proportion, Keith.
it sounds like a completely different world to what we now know. But I guess much of that was never really, I guess nothing was ever documented online.
Exactly. It was all word of mouth now. Most of the early history is probably lost in time, okay, or at least not digitized.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to remember during that time, life was not so complicated. You have Microsoft Word version, what, 1 or 2? Now it's what, 16, 20?
Yeah.
And things are not so complex at that point of time. So despite the chaos, all these issues and everything happened, something surprising happened. The interest in the program grew, and it actually grew very fast.
Mm.
So my wife and I saw that there's an opportunity for this. And she even left her job to focus on this full time around 2004 and 5. Around that time, we heard rumblings that the Ministry of Tourism, back then it was just known as MOT, not MOTAC, MOTAC, was taking a serious look at this program. That's when Dr. Junaida Lee Abdullah stepped in. That was like probably 20 years ago. She was the head of MM2H around 2006. And honestly, I think she was a real visionary. She did her homework, researched retirement visas program all over the world. She took what worked, scrapped what didn't, and reshaped it all to suit Malaysia's need. I remember her giving talks in Penang, especially during property expos. One that stands out very clearly was at the Langkawi Yachting Exposition in 2006.
Mm.
That was when MM2H really starting to get noticed globally. And I will never forget what she said. I forgot whether it's online, offline, or wherever it is. We won't aggressively promote MM2H. We will let it grow organically so that our infrastructure has time to catch up.
Mm.
Even up till today, it is left to grow organically. You have Visit Malaysia year and everything, but MM2H, very interesting, okay? Somehow, it is not there, but it gains a lot of traction. These are the kind of foresight that Dr. Junaida had, and it was very rare. She had seen what happened in places like Phuket, which exploded in popularity after the movies like The Beach and the James Bond's The Man with the Golden Gun. I'm sure you know about that movie. And that buckled under the weight of his own success. Phuket became the victim of his own success, and she did not want that to happen to Malaysia.
Interesting. You know, I remember at a international living conference, it must have been in probably 2016. I was giving a talk on Malaysia, and she came up and introduced herself. And she was incredibly impressive. But one of the first things she did after shaking my hand, she said to me, "Do you have MM2H?" And I said, "Of course."
Well, not in the traditional sense that the MOTEC is not promoting MM2H. You see, you have to understand this was not part of a big marketing push like Visit Malaysia here, which focused on long-term tourism. And mind you, staying long-term in a country and short-term as tourists, they are completely two different things. You can visit Thailand, Indonesia, US, or wherever it is as a tourist, you like it very much. But staying there long-term, whether it is the weather, the food, the people, the taxation, is a completely different story.
Sure.
Okay, MM2H was never about the flashy campaigns or billboards in Times Square. It was like, you want to stay here, you stay here. It grew quietly but powerfully through the internet and word of mouth. Back then, there was no social media. People found each other on old school internet forums, posting questions like, where's the best place to retire in Asia? And inevitably, somebody would say, have you heard about this program in Malaysia called the Malaysia My Second Home?
Right.
That's how it spread. One person at a time, and we saw it happen right before our eyes since we were there since 2006.
Yeah.
Every year, more and more people found their way to us. Alter Domus client base grew steadily even through the 2007 global financial crisis. In fact, I would say, Keith, especially during the recessions, more people were drawn to Malaysia, looking for more affordable, stable, and pleasant place to stay. And because it wasn't an explosive growth, Malaysia had time to adjust. I was in Penang, and remember in 2007, when the state government changed hands, suddenly there was a big push to improve the quality of life. Roads were widened, trash were cleaned, litter stopped piling up. And if you have visited Penang today, you will see it is genuinely clean.
Yeah, very clean.
It is very clean. Livable and welcoming. Hospitals were upgraded, housing options were expanded actually. And all this happened in parallel with a quiet rise of MM2H participants. So yes, it was the right approach, I feel. This is a personal opinion. For Malaysia, I think so. And for us at Alter Domus as well, it was perfect. It was not rushed. It was done in a very proper and structured manner. We focused on the internet, stayed consistent, especially on our values and our ethics and how we treated our customers. And before long, we became the go-to name. People didn't just find us. They recommended us to their friends, their family, and even their neighbors. So it just kept growing.
Yeah, that organic growth. I have to say, I think when we applied TG, it must have been about 2009. So we were right during that whole process when that process had just changed in 2007 and then 2009, and we found you the same way. So TG, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of the process now. What exactly were the requirements for MM2H?
Right, Keith. So things started really taking shape in 2006. That was the first major update since the MM2H was launched in 2002. The program was actually formalized and finally brought under one roof, the Malaysia My Second Home or MM2H Center, originally at PWTC in KL and later moved to Putrajaya in August 2011. Okay. The centralization was important and crucial. Before that, like I said earlier, each state's immigration office has its own version of MM2H. And the inconsistency, frankly, is a mess. Centralizing approvals help eliminate abuse and standardize the process. Instead of relying on individual officers, applications were now reviewed by a committee. Systems were introduced to make sure no one could cut the queue, and every application will be evaluated fairly. One of the biggest changes, the fixed deposit requirement. In 2002, it was just 100,000 across the board, but by 2006, it was increased to 150,000 for those above 50 years old and 300,000 for those below 50 years old. It was a threefold increase for younger applicants.
Right.
And naturally, there was a fair bit of pushback at first. Okay. So, although that was a very huge leap forward, okay, but it sounded very familiar. Right now, as usual, when you have people coming in and requirements go up, people get upset, But back then, just like now, the noise faded. By 2007, it was all settled down and people adjusted. And back then, there was another pathway called the income method. If you could show an income of, a consistent and sufficient source of income, in that time it was 10,000 ringgit a month, you could skip the fixed deposit requirement altogether. However, that lasted until 2010. And those who got it under that method, they are still renewing it today using the same criteria. So why did they take it out?
Yeah.
Fraud and abuse. So you don't have to put money in and then suddenly you just can come up with an income.
Yeah.
That's how it went. Okay. So between 2006 and 2020, 14 years, there were some tweaks, things like documentation requirements, background checks, and verification letter to prevent fraud. Although, Keith, let's be honest, in the real world, fraud still finds its way in. We'll dive deeper into that in part 4. Okay, but the core structure of fixed deposit and everything, it remained the same for that 1.5 decade. One thing people often forget is inflation. Over time, the bar has to move higher. Yet many still hope that the program would go back to the older, easier requirements. I usually tell them, do you expect the packet of rice, packet of bacon, packet of whatever that you eat will still be the same price even as in 2002 without going up? So let's be realistic. Inflation will always be there. And somehow inflation will still be tracked in this MM2H application. Same principle here.
Yeah, understandably. It's a good answer, TG. I fully get it. And you can also understand why people want it to be the same as what it used to be, for very good reasons. But you have to also understand, as you just said, why things move along. So TG, I was here in Malaysia during COVID, and I remember catching up with you on numerous occasions for coffee in Georgetown. It was such a surreal time. Can you tell us what exactly happened to MM2H during that period, during those pandemic years?
Keith, strange, heavy time. On March the 18th, 2020, Malaysia went into full lockdown, and just like that, MM2H came to a complete stop.
Yeah.
Between March and June, everything paused. Then, oddly enough, July 2020, it opened up again. And July 2020, that month, was one of our best months since we've started up.
Okay.
But that brief spike was followed by a complete full shutdown in August. The new unelected government at the time made the decision to completely shut down the MM2H. And just like that, the entire program was frozen.
I remember.
Yep. All pending files, many mid-process were returned, and we have to shred them literally. It was devastating. We later learned that they have uncovered, probably, we can never be confirmed, widespread fraud and abuse. Some companies saw 90% of their applications rejected in a blanket sweep.
Wow.
Ours wasn't spared either, but it was only a 30% rejection rate. And that was despite submitting strong clean cases. It wasn't about quality at that point of time. It was about politics, I think, and probably fear. Well, those were the strange days, isn't it, Keith? The COVID days were actually very strange days. So honestly, those were the darkest days. And not just for MM2H, but for Malaysia and probably for humanity in general. That's a long story. The one best told over a coffee or whiskey, face to face somewhere else, sometime. Like everything else in the world, COVID just didn't pause life. It slammed it shut for everyone in the world.
Yeah, no, I remember that period really well. I also think Malaysia actually handled COVID extremely well. I thought the government did a great job doing it. TG, so what happened next? What was the plan to then revive the program?
By the end of 2020, Ministry of Tourism or MOTAC, Ministry of Tourism, Arts and Culture, MOTAC, did try to pick up the pieces. They actually hired PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, to do a full review and propose improvements to MM2H. Our association, the MM2H Agents Association, which we were part of, we had a Zoom meeting with PwC, gave them our insights, and they produced a comprehensive report, I think, if I'm not mistaken, by January 2021.
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay, I think so. We never have a look at that report. But then nothing happened. Okay. And late 2021, a new version called the EMM2H was launched, either late 21 or early 22. It was a disaster from first day for the EMM2H because it has a very high requirement. 1 million ringgit fixed deposit and a monthly income of 40,000 ringgit. And it wasn't the 1 million ringgit that was the problem. It was a 40,000 income. That kind of income was not realistic for most retirees. You're talking about 10K US dollars.
Yeah.
MM2H has always appealed to the middle class foreigners, not the ultra high net worth people. And while that was happening, MM2H was actually moved from MOTAC to Immigration Headquarters in Putrajaya Precinct 2. The program has shifted from being people friendly to probably bureaucracy heavy.
So what happened next? How did that COVID-era government, handle things moving forward?
Well, the introduction of EMM2H in late 2021 marked the second major overhaul in the history of the MM2H program. The first being back in 2006. And just like that, we saw a threefold increase in the financial requirement. Remember, we talked about the threefold increase. From 300K to about 1 million ringgit. But the difference this time, the timeline. The first one took 16 years to change, and it was a long time. And this one came suddenly right after the global pandemic. Unsurprisingly, the uptake was actually very slow. It was still growing, but it was very slow. And if it had given time, I genuinely think that by 2025, 2026 or also often, people would have gotten used to this requirement, like what they did back in 2006, 2007. But for better, for worse, I think for better, in August 2023, the newly elected government terminated the EMM2H completely.
So in your opinion, it never really was given a chance?
Well, I think for better, for worse, I don't think the chance should be given because it's really very high requirement and the uptake will be very low, especially when it come in for the new MM2H. So, to be very honest, yes, it was a shame it was taken away, but on the positive side, yes, with time it could stabilize. Okay, but what happens is that even though that requirements were very heavy, there were some very interesting benefits that's given to people. Okay, since the beginning in 2004, I always tell my client, MM2H is very unique, Keith. One of the best features is that when a new benefit is introduced, it gets promoted to those who are the older participants, those who participated in the previous MM2H. Okay, and they get to enjoy this benefit as well. But when the requirements change for the tougher, those who are already on the program, they are not subjected to the change. They don't apply retroactively. Take for example, those who applied before 2007, they were initially not allowed to make partial withdrawal for their fixed deposit to buy property.
Right.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of abuse and probably on the state level, a lot of some hoo-ha here and there. We're not really very sure because that was just the beginning. But when that rule changed in 2007, the benefit was extended to them too. So that's how fair the system was. Then in 2021, when EMM2H was introduced, a couple of very thoughtful benefits were put in. One was raising the age limit for dependent children from 21 to 34, provided the child was unmarried. For many parents, especially in Asia, this was a huge thing. They like the kids to stay with them. Another was allowing participants to sponsor their in-laws, not just their own parents. Parents of the main applicants now include parents of their spouse. That had never been allowed before. And again, even though those who came in before, under the old MM2H, they were allowed to enjoy these perks as well. So I always tell our client, you apply early. The logic is very simple. When the program improves, you gain. And when it gets tougher, you are protected. It's a win-win. Of course, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are plenty of other lesser known parts of the program too, like the 20-hour per week part-time work allowance, which was quietly introduced at one point. It wasn't a game changer, but it was one of the little quirks that make MM2H interesting. However, that part, again due to abuse and fraud, was removed at a much later date.
What an amazing journey this program has had, TG. Let's fast forward to today. Tell us about the new MM2H program that was just introduced very recently.
Right. So the latest version of MM2H was called the new MM2H, was announced on December the 15th, 2023. It came with a whole new structure, platinum, gold, and silver tiers. Think of it like a loyalty program, but for living in Malaysia. The real details come out in June 2024, and one of the biggest changes was this. You must buy a property as part of the application process.
Right.
Along with that, the government launched something new called the SEZ or SFZ, the Special Economic Zones and the Special Financial Zones. We'll touch more about that later on. For now, I'll tell you, we have submitted our first application under the new scheme in October 2024. Now, compared with the harsh EMM2H, which was introduced in 2021-2022, the new MM2H is a clear relaxation of the rules, especially the silver tier, which is proving to be the most popular category. Here's how it works for silver. You can deposit your fund in US dollar or ringgit, but I think it's going to be ringgit pretty soon in future.
Okay.
The amount is 150,000 US dollar or equivalent in ringgit. You are allowed to withdraw 50% from this deposit to purchase a property. So that means that essentially only 75,000 stays in the bank at all times until you decide to cancel the visa. Let's say you buy a home in Penang where the minimum purchase price threshold is 600K, or actually 500K to be that matter, the lowest in Malaysia. You're looking at bringing in around ringgit 1 million in total outlay for the deposit and the property. Add in the application cost, some basic renovations, furnishing or whatever. I think you need about 1.1 million ringgit, and you are comfortably started here.
I mean, that's a really significant investment when you think about it. How does that compare to the previous EMM2H?
Good question, Keith. Under the EMM2H, you had to deposit 1 million ringgit. And again, you could only withdraw 50%, half a million out, and the other half a million stayed locked in. If you have bought a property, 600K property, you would have ended up needing approximately 1.1 million in direct outlay. You add in all other things, probably 1.2, 1.3. So yes, the new MM2H is just marginally less demanding financially than the previous version, especially if you have to factor in the property element. But there's more to unpack when it comes to the property rules, and we'll get into more details in the next segment.
TG, that's a fascinating walk through MM2H. Well done. So before we move on to part two, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, just one final thought, more on a personal opinion lately. I personally, I did not see the PwC report, the full report that PwC delivered to MOTEC in 2021. But I believe they really did their homework and they really did a good job. From what I understand and speculate, I believe they spoke to actual MM2H participants and gathered valuable feedback. I suspect that much of what they learned eventually made its way and incorporated into the new MM2H, which was launched in December 2023. Unfortunately, the EMM2H created by the COVID-era government was completely tone-deaf. It was impractical and it alienated rail retirees. And it was officially scrapped in August 2023 by the new government elected in November 2022. Then in December 2023, MOTAC took back control of the program from the Immigration Department. That was a big moment. The entire MM2H center was relocated back from Putrajaya's Precinct 2 to MATEC, where it frankly has been its home all along. For us, it marked a new beginning. Our new agency license for this new MM2H was issued in August 2024. We submitted our first application under the new scheme in October, and I'm happy to say our first approval came in early December 2024.
Fantastic. TG, thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith.
Into retirement visas. It's like that's a massive leap on any kind of scale. So what made you decide to move from that and to set up this company?